Friends, this is a Clock Prophecy update for April 6, 2019. As you know, Barack Obama was in Berlin over the weekend to participate in some sort of town hall where he delivered a commentary. Now, to my knowledge, nothing has happened that would bring us into the events of Revelation chapter 13, but it's interesting that in news reports he is quoted as referring to a firing squad and to the shooting of allies of the left, which I believe to be a prophetic statement coming from him that will be fulfilled in time. This will be the 101st video of the Clock Prophecy, which has a prophetic tie-in to Revelation chapter 10, verse 10, and is mathematically linked, as shown in my little book, to Psalm 71:20, a prophecy that may help you understand some of the mystery surrounding the Clock Prophecy message. I am excited to share with you that we have been given confirmation for the location of a meteor impact described in Revelation chapters 8 and 18. For the past 2 years, I have discussed the arrival of a meteor that I expect to strike the Tyrrhenian Sea near Rome. About a week ago, it's been a few weeks now, an Italian man captured an image over the sea about 200 miles south of Rome, not far from where the Tyrrhenian Sea flows into the Mediterranean. An unusually bright cloud formation near the coastal city of Agropoli has gone viral, and millions of people have now seen it. I've done a spectral analysis of this image by removing all glare to reveal additional details, and both the original and the filtered images are shown at the website. The filtered image reveals a stunning set of geometric shapes that mimic the exact architecture of the Vatican. The presence of column-like structures in this image is impossible to ignore. I have inserted a picture of the Vatican grounds so you can see this for yourself. Again, you will need to go to the website to see these remarkable images. I have no doubt that this represents a warning to Rome and is another fulfillment of the words of Jesus that signs would appear in heaven to help us know where we are on the timeline. If this marks the impact site of the meteor described by John in Revelation chapters 8 and 18, it may indicate fulfillment during 2019. As always, I do not know the date of any future event, which is why I ask you to watch as Jesus instructed. I have updated the meteor impact map I published in 2017 to show the epicenter of an impact about 200 miles further south than in my earlier estimate. You can see the revised map at the website. This more southern location will mean a somewhat less dire outcome for France and Germany, but not for Greece, which would be completely engulfed in flames. Remember that Greece produced Antiochus IV, a vile Antichrist prototype whose persecution of the Jews was especially brutal. If the Agropoli cloud formation marks the site of the meteor strike, there will be virtually nothing left of Greece after this impact occurs. The same applies to Italy and to Rome, which would remain in the most affected portion of a 1,600-mile-wide blast zone. Most of Europe will be devastated, and the lives of hundreds of millions will be lost. At the same time, early rapture will be occurring. A closer view of the Italian coast, with a focus on Agropoli, is also shown at the website. I want to remind you that the black ring on the clock ends on July 12th, which does not mean that all the events in Revelation will occur in 2019. It just means we could reach critical mass on the clock and see the rise of the Antichrist before year end. In January, we talked about the last full lunar eclipse before the end of an 80-year period since Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, declared it was time to open the gates of Palestine. The psalmist wrote that the days of man are between 70 and 80 years, and Jesus said the rebirth of modern Jerusalem, represented by a fig tree in Matthew 24, would mark the final generation of human government on earth. Jesus said that a late sign would be the moon turning to blood. The blood moon eclipse in January was quite possibly the very astronomical event to which Jesus was referring. It is important to point out that the moon can appear as blood for other reasons. For example, when massive amounts of volcanic ash are ejected into Earth's atmosphere, or when dust particulates are ejected from the impact site of a large meteor, as we would expect when the two objects John describes in Revelation strike the Earth. I have applied the parameters of the destruction John saw in his vision using computer modeling software at Liverpool University in London to assess the size and speed of the great burning mountain he saw impact the sea near Rome. My research has shown this object to be a meteor of 5 to 7 miles wide, traveling close to 65,000 miles per hour when it strikes. Remember that Daniel also prophesied the impact of this object in the sea. Now, the amount of debris that this impact will eject into our atmosphere will create a kind of blanket around the Earth, blocking light from the sun and moon for possibly several months before it dissipates. I believe this event will fulfill John's prophecy in Revelation chapter 16, verse 10, that darkness will fall upon the kingdom of the beast. This impact will also trigger the world's greatest earthquake, also prophesied in Revelation 16. Just 5 verses later, we see reference to a rapture event in conjunction with the Battle of Armageddon, again affirming the removal of the man-child John calls the first fruits of harvest in Revelation 14, verse 4, a Jewish remnant caught up to God in chapter 12. The church is always described using the female gender by the Apostle Paul, and unlike the 144,000 virgin Jewish males found in Revelation chapter 7, according to John, in the very same passage, cannot be numbered. So we have a group of 144,000, and then we have a group that cannot be numbered. This is how we know the 4-part harvest taught by Jesus in Matthew 20 includes an early rapture of the man-child and a separate rapture for the bride of Christ. In other words, there are 2 major rapture groups, followed by a final catching up at the end for those who are alive and remain. The martyrs are a separate harvest group. All 4 of these crops are listed in Revelation chapter 6, verse 6. Here is how the Bible breaks it down. Group 1, a first fruits barley harvest, Revelation 14:4, which is the man-child, at the 3rd trumpet, or 3 p.m., as Jesus states in Matthew 20, verse 3. Group 2, a harvest of the wheat or bride saints at the 6th trumpet, or 6 p.m., as Jesus says in verse 5, also in the vineyard parable. Group 3, the martyrs or grape and wine harvest at 9 p.m., stated by Jesus again in Matthew 20 and found in Revelation chapter 14, verse 18. And finally, Group 4, a final winter oil harvest of olives at 11 p.m., a late rapture for those who are alive and remain, as stated by Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4:17. And the last group Jesus portrays in his parable with the words, "Many that are first shall be last, and last that shall be first." See Matthew 20, verse 16. When Paul refers to the resurrection of the dead before the final rapture event, he is only referring to the final 2 groups at the final trump. But using all Scripture to bring us to a place of understanding on this topic, we can see that the harvest is divided in more ways than just 2 groups at the final trump. As I hope you can also see, my teaching that the rapture of the church occurs at the 6th trumpet corresponds to the Lord's reference to 6 p.m., which is linked by him to the second harvest group in his vineyard parable. It should come as no surprise then that the divine numerics of Scripture place the first fruits rapture of the Jewish man-child at the 3rd trumpet, which is why Jesus links the first harvest group to 3 p.m. on the clock in the same parable. Remember that the 2nd and 3rd trumpets of the 7th seal pertain to 2 objects that strike the earth, and these may be separated in times by hours, days, or weeks. I have suggested that the second such object may be a fragment of the first, in which case there may be very little time between them. The second object may hit the northeastern United States or some other area where there are major lakes and waterways, as John describes in his vision. As a reminder, Here is the order that we expect during the prophecy trifecta once it begins. 1. The Obama false flag head wound event, Revelation 13, verse 3. 2. A meteor off the coast of Italy, and a second object shortly thereafter. And 3. The Battle of Armageddon and early rapture of the 144,000, after which the rapture of the church will begin. The Antichrist will arise immediately after the Obama event, and we will have reached critical mass on the clock. To learn more about the importance of an 80-year generation based on Psalms 90, verse 10, see the introduction of my book, The Clock of the Four Night Watches, where I discuss May 11, 1942, a key date in modern Jewish history when the decree for the rebirth of the modern Jewish state was first uttered. I believe it is this date that defines the true start of our final generation, as it adheres to the instruction given by God to Daniel that he count time not from points of prophetic fulfillment, but from dates of decree. This does not, of course, ensure an 80-year generational period for us. There may be longer periods of time that define a generation biblically, but if an 80-year generational period does apply to our time, then we can look for time to be cut short in late 2020. This is also why the final chapter of my book discusses 2020 as the year the Lord may physically return, because the Feast of Tabernacles that year will be the last to occur during this 80-year period of time. This may be my last video, or it may be a temporary pause while we watch for events to unfold going into the final days of the Black Ring on the clock in mid-July. Check the website for updates in case there are no video updates here on YouTube. Be aware that the flood of deception promoting Bible codes as a way to tell you the date of the rapture is either CIA or Satanist-funded propaganda operations set up to deceive believers. In fact, most of the channels that we see on YouTube covering these topics are psyops. If you dig deeply into these channels, as I have, you will find that most of them attack Israel as a false Jewish state, as well as promote a universal day of rapture for every believer. Some will even tell you that you are eternally lost if you miss the rapture. This is a deception. Revelation chapter 12 prophesies this flood of untruth that comes from the mouth of the dragon to carry away the woman, meaning Israel and the church. The teaching of a false Jewish state is designed to prevent the return of Messiah because Satan knows that Zion, or Jerusalem, is the key to Christ's return. If he can, he will destroy Israel. Of course, God will not permit this in order to prevent the return of Christ. The universal day of rapture teaching is designed to fuel the falling away when those who are last and not first, Matthew 20 verse 16, believe they were not truly saved and take the mark or otherwise lose faith. Remember the words of Jesus, "He that endureth unto the end shall be saved." Yes, there will be early raptures, but we must endure until our appointed times. In closing, if we don't see the second trumpet of the seventh seal this year, meaning the massive meteor that destroys Rome and most of Europe, and a second object that may strike New York for its passage of laws permitting infanticide, I will begin to talk about a longer generational period that may carry us into 2020 or later, before the start of early rapture. Remember, just as no one knows the day or hour, no one knows the year for any future prophesied event. All we know for sure is that the time we have left is growing very, very short. God bless as you continue to hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Behold, I come quickly. This is Peter John Brandel.